Relations at the United Nations. And it is my pleasure to welcome you here today for today's event. The title is Midway Through the Implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, Push for Accelerated Progress Towards the SDGs. So this is a second in a series of special civil society town halls with His Excellency, Mr. Csaba Kőrösi, who is, as you know, the President of the 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly. The first town hall, perhaps some of you attended that was held on the 2nd of December in 2022. And at that town hall, President Kőrösi outlined his vision of providing solutions to the world's problems through solidarity and also sustainability, science, youth involvement, and also partnerships. So if you missed it, it's still possible to watch that recording on UNTV. And I think we all would like to thank the President of the General Assembly, Kőrösi, for again convening this town hall. It shows how much he cares about addressing civil society and also hearing from you. Civil society voices he wants to place at the forefront of the work that he's trying to achieve as President of the General Assembly. That is inclusive, equitable, prosperous, and peaceful world. That is the aims of the United Nations and also this presidency. Civil society representatives, like those of you joining us here today, have been and remain crucial stakeholders in finding transformative solutions to our global challenges. Your expertise and your dedication and also your activities are crucial in helping, then they were crucial in helping to establish the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and we need you. We continue to need you. You are essential, your work, in helping us to drive their progress. We are at the midway point, as the title suggests, but unfortunately, due to many circumstances that I'm sure you're all aware of, that progress of Agenda 2030 is seriously off track. And so really we're looking for a reset. Much is at stake. This September, a high-level political forum on sustainable development will be convened under the auspices of the General Assembly. And this 2023 SDG Summit is really a key moment to find bold solutions and to get back on track. So I am also so pleased to say that we are joined here today by the co-facilitators of the political declaration of the upcoming 2023 summit. We have Her Excellency Ms. Alia Ahmed Saif Al Thani. She is here on my left, and she is the permanent representative of the state of Qatar to the United Nations. And joining us shortly will be His Excellency Mr. Fergal Mithin, who is the permanent representative of Ireland to the United Nations. So we will be hearing from them and their reflections at the end of today's program, also after they've had a chance to hear from you. While this town hall is not part of the formal preparatory process of the 2023 SDG Summit as such, and no official outcome is expected following this event, this town hall is an important opportunity for civil society organizations, as well as youth representatives and also academia, like you, to bring your perspectives and your data based on deep experience. We are going to be listening. We really look forward to hearing how your experience can inform deliberations of member states in preparation for this very important summit. And we look forward to your insights on how we can all work together to achieve the SDGs. We cannot do it alone. Before I turn the floor over to the PGA, as we call him, the President of the General Assembly, he has a nickname, I would like to note that today's event is available in the 6 official languages of the United Nations, so please tune in to the language of your choice. And in the room, you can, especially if you are listening in another language, you can use the earpieces that are at your seats, and you will find the choice of language on the desk itself. And for those of you watching online, you can select the language you want to hear at the drop-down menu on your screen, accessible by clicking the globe at the bottom. And those of you who are posting on social media, we encourage you to follow us on Twitter at UNDGC_CSO and at UN_PGA. And please use the hashtag UN with civil society. You see it very conveniently on the name plates in front of you. And it is now my honor once again to introduce the President of the General Assembly, Mr. Csaba Kőrösi. And let me just say a few words about his background. He's held various service posts in his home country of Hungary, and he has dedicated his professional life to public service. He was the head of mission to Greece and also the United Arab Emirates, and also served as ambassador and permanent representative of Hungary to the United Nations, as well as vice president of the 66th session of the UN General Assembly. He has a deep history of engaging with civil society. He played a vital role in the development of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Sustainable Development Goals as co-chair of the Open Working Group of the General Assembly, where he worked alongside civil society to ensure the inclusion of the voices of diverse stakeholders. His efforts have been critical in ensuring that the SDGs remain at the top of the global agenda. And his respect for civil society is evident in his current presidency, as time and again he highlights the importance of including civil society representatives and perspectives in impact-focused discussions. First, we will hear his remarks, and that will be followed by statements from several civil society representatives. And then we will open the floor to questions, and I emphasize questions, please, and not statements. And then we will hear concluding reflections from His Excellency Mr. Mithin, the PGA of, the PR, as Permanent Representative of Ireland, and Her Excellency Ms. Al Thani, the PR of Qatar. And we look forward to a dynamic discussion. Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you much indeed, USG Minister Fleming, my good friend. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, New York and Americas. Good afternoon, Europe and Africa. Good evening, Asia and Australia. You're welcome on board. My special thanks go to the Department of Global Communications, DESA and SDG Action Campaign, and OHCHR for their supporting in organizing this second town hall meeting. As the 77th session moves into its second half, the General Assembly is preparing for the SDG Summit, as we heard just a couple of minutes ago, in September, which will be the pivotal event of the high-level week, the most important event in September. Dear colleagues and friends, a cornerstone of my presidency has been to involve actors from outside of the UN into our work. I've held several consultations with scientists, youth representatives, civil society organizations, with many of you personally involved, as well as private sector actors and financial institutions. My aim is and remains in bringing the outside knowledge to improve the quality of policymaking by ensuring the decision makers have the better understanding of the issues they are creating policies for. My expectation is that this approach contributes to the more evidence-based proposals on how to address the challenges we are facing today. It worked very well in the run-up and during the March UN Water Conference, where, with your help, we achieved a breakthrough after 46 years. Something similar is needed on a number of issues in the forthcoming months to help real transformation and crisis management in this world. Recent reports, as we heard from the USG Fleming, recent reports tracking the progress of the achievements on the SDGs by 2030 have contained sobering conclusions. We are seriously off track due to the combination of a complex and intersecting crises. In recent years, we have even regressed on some SDG targets. So not the progress is lacking, but actually we are moving backward. The way we have been trying to implement the change is not working good enough. We need an overhaul. We need a transformation. Our goals and targets must remain, as we agreed, but transformation means a profound change of the implementation. I mean not only a change of gear, but a change of the game. We need civil society, practitioners, scientists, experience to inform member states' deliberations to advance progress towards the achievement of the SDGs by 2030. While the SDG summit will take place in September, the moment to start bringing bold and action-oriented ideas, game changers, is now. We need civil society to be a critical part of the preparatory process leading up to the summit. And here I would like to invite you now, immediately, to act. To kick off our discussion on how to make the SDG Summit a watershed moment, please take your phones. I hope all of you have it. Okay, fine. So I would like to hear your opinion directly from you. The first question you will be requested to answer might be very soon on the screen. In 1 or 2 words, please define success for the 2030 SDG Summit. In order to achieve that, you have to go to the browser and type www.menti.com. And when you reach this site, type the following code: 31991784. Should I repeat it? Okay, the code is 31991784. So please send 1 or 2 words describing your best choices and best opinion of how to define success of the 2023 SDG Summit.
Does everyone have it? Menti, MENTI.com. You have it, good.
We have about almost 70 opinions so far. Anybody else still in the process of sending his or her opinion? Okay, so we wait for a couple of seconds more. Okay, we are reaching 100, so let me stop this first opinion polling right now. As you see, the most demanded, expected action from your side is inclusion. It's not a surprise from an NGO community, but almost at the same level, collaboration. Collaboration in a world which is deeply divided today. I fully agree with you. Action, because we have, and I also agree with you, because we have many goals, many targets, many programs, but the action for implementation is lagging way behind. I still see youth and diversity and equity as very strongly prominent figuring notions from your side. Thank you much indeed. Then let's move to the next question. What are the biggest challenges in the way of achieving SDGs? You will see here multiple choices. Please distribute 100 points among those options what you see. Armed conflicts, geopolitical divides, inequalities, inadequate financing, lack of political will, corruption, inability to measure implementation, or other. If you wish, you may give all 100 points of yours to one of the options, or you distribute according to your liking. So what is the biggest challenge? What are the biggest challenges of achieving the SDGs? We are approaching 80. Anybody else to send his or her opinion? Okay, then let's stop it here. We have about 114, 15. The first is inequalities. Thank you much. Actually, inequalities in the world have been huge during the crafting of the SDGs. Today, the inequalities are much bigger. In the last 7 years, the inequalities grew much, much faster than anything else within countries and among countries as well. We knew when we adopted the SDGs that this is an agenda that requires joint efforts, requires solidarity among the members of the countries, members of different communities, and among countries as well. If we cannot turn around inequalities, the trends of growing inequalities, the whole agenda will be in jeopardy. Just today I saw the latest figures that the largest and fastest growing inequalities in the world in terms of continent are now in Africa. The continent that very badly needs a sustainability transformation. Let's go to the third question then. What transformative changes are necessary to get the SDGs back on track? Please, again, distribute your 100 points among the options. SDG stimulus, meaning increased financing, IFI, international financial institutions reform, beyond GDP, it's a concept which is one of the targets in the SDG 17, which means a renewed economics, multi-stakeholder partnership, political will, restoring the credibility of commitments. Yes, please. It is still not closed. You can do it, but hurry up. We are at the level 104, 105 now, so we are going to close it very soon. Okay, we are at the level 120, so now we have to stop it because of the being conscious of time. So about 1/3 of the votes went to political commitments. Could I get the? Thank you. So 1/3 of the votes about political commitment. It's a good message to our good colleagues and friends, the PRs of Qatar and Ireland. We definitely need a renewed political commitment before September and during the summit meeting in September. We need a multi-stakeholder partnership, what you ranked on the second place. Governments don't have the monopoly for wisdom. Governments don't have the means for the implementation all to the success of the transformation. Governments have your cooperation of the civil society, of the scientific academic era, and the practitioners and many other stakeholders. And certainly we need to do something with finances. If I combine the SDG stimulus with IFI reform, which are going hand in hand, it's almost 1/3 of your expectations. And I would like to draw your attention to the last point, which only received 12% of the votes, but basically it is one of the most revolutionary ones. If we go to develop further the notion of going beyond GDP, it means we are going to renew our economic thinking. It means it is the economics of sustainable development, what we don't have today. Thank you very much indeed for your contributions. It was very, very informative, very helpful. To both our co-facilitators and myself, and I think the Secretary as well. As we move forward, I pledge to remain fully committed to working hand in hand with all of you. We take your opinion very close to our hearts, and I'm eager to hear your ideas and to learn from your experience later today. Thank you very much.
Thank the PGA for your inspiring statement, but also for conducting this very participatory poll. I think it shows us your perspective on what is important, and I think it's very aligned. I think there's some areas that we haven't provided enough communications around in some of these priority areas that we think are going to be important for helping to achieve the SDGs. So very, very useful to us. Thanks for taking part. As many of you know, we opened a call for statements from civil society to provide you with an opportunity to share insights on how you can contribute to implementing the SDGs. The questions we asked you to reflect on were, how can we make the political declaration most relevant, impactful, and a source of high-level political guidance? Number two, what are the most critical elements to be included in the political declaration, keeping in mind the need for it to be succinct, impactful, and easy to read while providing up-to-date recommendations to advance the SDGs? And finally, what transformations are necessary to improve the implementation of the SDGs until 2027, which is when we'll have the next SDG summit, and what do member states need to do to achieve that? So it is now my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Brian Mayana, who is the founder and CEO of Eco Rafiki Africa from Kenya, and he will share his views today through a pre-recorded video.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Maina Brian. I am an innovator, environmentalist, and an advocate for global climate justice and the SDGs. As a young Kenyan and African, I stand before you today, not just as a representative of my generation, but as a voice of our collective future. In a vast expanse of human history, we find ourselves at decisive crossroads. My niece, who was born in 2020, will be 10 years old in 2030. Is this the world that we really want her to inherit? Our world is in dire need for transformative action. The SDGs are our urgently needed blueprints. Yet, as we gather, we must face the stark reality that we are falling short on its implementation. It is time for us to change how we act, address these challenges, and recognize as well as celebrate the contributions of these actors who are working tirelessly yet with limited resources to create transformational change in their communities. By amplifying our voices, supporting our initiatives, and providing us with the resources we need to succeed, together we will achieve the SDGs and build a better world for us and the future generations. In regards to the political declaration to be adopted, we have three key asks. We urge you to include ambitious and pivotal language on, first, meaningful youth leadership at all levels of decision-making. Africa is young. Actually, we are the youngest population, on average 19-year-old. Did you know that the median age for African leaders is 63 years? Meaningful intergenerational decision-making is key and must leave tokenism and nepotism behind. We are ready to lead with you, but we need you to give us a seat at the table. Second, transformative action ensures the necessary transformation. The Africa Forward Initiative, led by the CSOs under the auspices of Catalyst 2030, is a testament to the dedication and resilience of our people, building on leaders across the continent to shift the dominant paradigm from historical colonial structures and norms to develop a vibrant social innovation economy with solutions developed for our people by our people. It is time for us to unite, to fund and support these efforts, readdressing the narrative and empowering our African youth and civil society. Third, reforms of international financing systems, where sustainable grants will be offered without imposing additional debt burdens on countries. This is especially important for Africa, where many countries struggle with high level of debt and limited physical space to fund development initiatives. Grant-based financing will support to overcome these challenges, enabling countries to invest in areas critical to achieving the SDGs. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa is not only the youngest continent. Africa is also vibrant, poised to redefine its narrative and chart a path forward. It is also full of underestimated and undervalued potential. It is time for you to take Africa seriously on the global stage. Hence, we propose hosting the next SDG Summit and the Summit of the Future on our young, vibrant, and underestimated continent. Here, the future resides. By being in this room today, we are representing the needs, dreams, and futures of not only 8 billion people living on this planet now, but also the billions that will be born. The survival of our human species is measured by our ability to act collectively with courage and determination. Ultimately, we all belong to the same family. We are brothers and sisters in this human race. Let us seize this unique and pivotal moment, embrace this opportunity before us, and build a world where we all flourish. The SDG Summit must be an implementation summit for peaceful and prosperous societies that leave no one behind. Together, let us move Africa and the world forward towards a brighter future for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. M. Aina, and really appreciate those insights and so very specific calls to action to achieve the SDGs. Also, you're reminding us how the world is in dire need for transformative but intergenerational action and change, and that solutions should be developed. I think that's very relevant for this room by our people, in your words, for our people, and leveraging all the potential of Africa. We heard you. Thank you very much for that inspiring statement. And now I would like to invite Ms. Bhumika Muchala from Third World Network from the United States to give her statement. She's in the room. Ms. Muchala, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, President of the General Assembly, respected delegates and colleagues. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. My name is Bhumika Muchala, and I represent the Third World Network. So I would like to start with, first of all, saying that achieving the Sustainable Development Goals by the 2030 timeline is under siege today. We have multiple and intersecting crises, from COVID to war, inflation, monetary tightening, and intensifying climate emergencies that have compounded pre-existing inequalities, defunded the state in many parts of the developing world, and has accelerated south to north wealth and resource extraction. There is today persistent empirical evidence that developing countries finance developed countries through illicit financial flows, through debt repayments that are not being restructured due to the absence of a multilateral debt workout mechanism, through asymmetrical trade rules, capital outflows due to the inability to regulate finance, reserves that defend currencies depreciating sharply due to monetary tightening. And these are just a few examples out of many. So we have to locate that it is in this context of resource strain that the global narrative of the SDG financing gap is created, leading to the SDGs call for an SDGs stimulus to scale up affordable long-term financing. However, I've just come from attending last week's spring meetings of the IMF and World Bank in Washington, D.C., and I saw how the World Bank's Evolution Roadmap, published just recently, reinforces a private turn in its approach of financing both concessional and MDB lending. This focus on mobilizing and leveraging private capital can be seen through this idea and narrative and practice of the de-risking state. This is where the state absorbs the private sector risks through co-financing, loan guarantees, political risk insurance, or public equity co-investments. Such an enabling environment for private investment involves deregulatory, normative, and legal reforms, which can also include the creation of new financial products and tools to mitigate private risks. So this incentivizing private investors through a pipeline of bankable projects and assets with green or sustainability credibility entails a transfer of risks, a socializing of risks from the private sector onto state and citizens. What about the plethora of risks to social equality, the resilience of public systems, climate justice, policy space for structural transformation, and state accountability to citizens? In the global zeal to tap into private financing to plug fiscal gaps in the short term, we need to ask who benefits, who is exploited, and what is being neglected. The numerous failures of leveraging private finance to achieve the SDGs sets a cautionary precedent against deepening market creation at the expense of the public sector, commodifying public services that are at the heart of the SDGs, such as health and education. Financialization deepens developing countries' exposure to international capital markets and its volatility. In the absence of a multilateral debt workout mechanism, incentivizing private finance also introduces new creditors and new debt instruments that further compounds debt restructuring and resolution efforts. Meanwhile, communities are decentered as democratic and participatory policymaking is sabotaged when the government's accountability is directed towards the needs of private investors rather than the needs of its citizens. Now, for private investment to work, there must be ample policy space to regulate state regulation over private actors. Examples of such regulation abound throughout economic history, prioritizing national and local firms and investors through means such as joint venture arrangements, sharing or transferring technology, ensuring that certain amounts of inputs can be locally sourced, and for employees to be local, not foreign, as well as creating domestic facilities for research and development. But I must stress, in the red-hot urgency of a global South debt crisis, where total debt in the developing world stands at a 50-year high, where over 60% of low-income countries are in debt distress and spend far more on servicing their debt as a proportion of gross national income than at any point in the past 3 decades, the just and rights-based approach to SDG financing would be new, additional, debt-free, and unconditional public grant financing. Such financing was made available by rich countries during the pandemic's fiscal stimulus, as well as in recent and past bank bailouts, as recently as a couple weeks ago, not to mention historical examples such as the Marshall Fund. It is not a matter of feasibility, it is a matter of political will and concern born out of historical and current responsibilities stemming from the long legacy of colonialism, extraction, and structural inequalities. Now, the SDG stimulus also includes rechanneling special drawing rights through the MDBs. However, the true developmental value of SDRs to finance SDGs lies exactly in its original identity of being a non-debt creating and unconditional reserve asset. Even though its quota-based distribution led to over 2/3 of the $650 billion issuance in 2021 by the IMF to go to developed economies that didn't need them, still, at least 99 developing countries use their SDRs for SDG-related health and welfare needs such as COVID vaccine purchases and social protection financing. The full protection of SDRs to create genuine financial resources for the SDGs requires a decoupling SDR issuances from economic power and instead allocating by economic need. If allocated by need, regular issuances of SDRs are a counter-cyclical boost toward a more resilient global financial safety net, which could also help prevent harmful currency depreciations in developing countries today. So I conclude with 3 calls. As the Financing for Development Forum this week has highlighted, a rules-based multilateral debt workout mechanism under the auspices of the UN is required. Such a mechanism could provide fair, timely, and comprehensive debt treatment from all lenders, bilateral, multilateral, and private, and for all countries according to their needs. The Financing for Development Forum and the UN General Assembly already has resolutions that support such a debt restructuring mechanism, and it is time to move forward on that. Today, there is a historic call made by developing countries in the General Assembly for a UN tax convention to tackle tax evasion and avoidance, democratize the development of tax rules, and create an inclusive and level playing field for all countries. This must be pursued toward a 4th FFD conference. And perhaps the biggest elephant in the room is precisely that of structural transformation, the process by which domestic production sectors are articulated through diversification, value chain upgrading, and the active role of public development banks that provide patient capital. Achieving the SDGs requires transforming out of low-wage, low-value global value chains and commodity dependence, and only such transformation will deliver debt justice beyond cycles of debt distress in the global South. The African Union representative noted in the Financing for Development Forum this week, the international environment is not conducive enough to execute the structural transformation from net exporters of raw materials in the South to genuine diversification. Indeed, the Financing for Development Forum within the UN is a key arena that connects systemic inequalities to the right to development in global tax, debt, financial and trade system. After all, without such systemic course corrections in the financial architecture, scaling up financing in the short term may be akin to pouring water down a sieve in light of a financial system riddled with loopholes and gaps. To do this, the world needs an inclusive and democratic decision-making in perhaps the only global institution upholding multilateralism, self-determination, and human rights for all peoples, and that is the United Nations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Muchala, for sharing your very important expert perspective on financing the SDGs and also your very specific proposals, which I'm sure we will take very much on board in our thinking. Our final statement comes to us from Mr. Kanta Jean-Baptiste, representing Groundswell International from Haiti. Mr. Jean-Baptiste, we look forward to hearing from you.
Excellencies, thank you for this opportunity. We make this statement on behalf of a group of all the civil society organizations working on agroecology that came together at the Civil Society Forum for the United Nations LDC 5 conference in Doha last March. Why we have chosen to focus on LDCs in this session, a global level conversation on transformation needed to produce a quality change in the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals at the global level. Because if we do not effectively address the poverty that plagues LDCs, and if we do not build on the existing strengths, the SDG agenda will fail. At the LCD5, the UN Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohamed emphasized that achieving the Sustainable Development Goals is in the least developed countries is a litmus test for achieving the 2030 agenda writ large, including by ensuring that no one and no LDC is left behind. The stories told about LDCs emphasize the lacks. The dominant story told about hunger, for example, is that food insecurity is the result of inadequate food supplies, which in turn is blamed on lack of technology, of fertilizer, of energy, of credit and storage, on low productivity and poor woods. There is some truth in this story, yet the story ignores the role of unjust global economic structures, including unjust international trade and investment worlds, in creating challenges for LDCs as they do in many parts of the global south. The proposed solution mostly focuses on imported inputs and technology, which contribute to deepening LDCs' depth and increase their vulnerability to shocks in international markets, such as was caused by the war in Ukraine. Smallholder food system feed billions of people around the world today, and including many of who live in LDCs. Securing public investment to build on the knowledge of smallholder producers on how to work with, but not against nature, offers a very different and much more hopeful future than continuing to insist food insecurity can only emerge from private proprietary seed system, fossil fuel-derived fertilizer, and the export of unprocessed commodities into highly concentrated markets. Our organization were in Doha to counter the story of lacks with a story of hope and possibility. Our story is centered on investing in LDC communities, as indeed in rural communities everywhere, and protecting and building on the contextual and complex knowledge. Our call is a call for build on agricultural strengths as a pathway to prosperity. It is a story of agroecological transition towards food sovereignty and the realization of the right to food. Food systems need to produce and process and make available a diverse range of foods in ways that nurture the land, soil, and water, and that protect people's livelihoods and their culture. In adopting agroecological practices, we can take on the complex set of objectives such as the 2030 Agenda. If we think about the system in which food is grown and distributed and intervene on multiple points in that system for change, we can reduce greenhouse gas emission, conserve fresh water, protect biodiversity, empower women, and increase farm productivity by reducing input costs. For the lack of time, please allow me to submit in writing for your consideration the final statement delivered at the Civil Society Forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jean-Baptiste, and also for your story or telling about hope and possibility for the LDCs with local solutions for food systems that protect people, livelihoods, and their culture. Very thought-provoking, much appreciated. And we thank all speakers today. I would now like to continue the session with questions from you, civil society. And as was the case in the first PGA Town Hall, we have a diverse group of representatives joining today, and we really look forward to hearing from you. In an effort to ensure that we hear from a wide range of voices and representation from different geographies, we are having the first two questions coming to us via video. We'll take these two questions and then turn to you, President Kőrösi, for your replies to those. So the first question comes to us from, let me introduce you first, Mabel Bianco in Argentina, and she's speaking on behalf of, excuse my pronunciation, Fundación para el Estudio e Investigación de la Mesure, which translates in English as the Foundation for Studies and Research on Women.
I am Mabel Bianco from Fundación para Estudio e Investigación de la Mujer from Argentina, and I am speaking on behalf of the Civil Society Participation Mechanism for Sustainable Development in Latin America and the Caribbean. As everybody knows, but specifically in our region, COVID makes a great crisis in terms of health and in terms of economics due to the problems that it creates. Meanwhile, later on, with the crisis by the war in Russia and Ukraine, we are suffering great problems. The Lancet started to analyze how to improve women's health due to COVID impact if we consider not only socioeconomical determinants, but also what they call commercial determinants. Commercial determinants are those produced by the big enterprises, international enterprises, that affects the decision of the people due to the market to use or consume some product, and these produce a problem on the people and on the environment. So how we are going to approach this? How do you think that the Global Summit could be approach this in order to really impact and decrease the COVID impact?
I thank Ms. Bianco for sharing that recording and question. And the next question is from Mr. Ogagogene Jesse E. Tibri from the NGO Universal Peace and Violence Amelioration Center in Nigeria.
Hello, I am Ogagogene Jesse Itibri from Universal Peace and Violence Amelioration Center with headquarters in Nigeria, an organization with special consultative status with the United Nations Economic and Social Council since 2019. Greetings to the President of the General Assembly, the Department of Global Communications, the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Thank you for this great opportunity to ask a question during the second PGA Townhall meeting with civil societies and other stakeholders present. Following this opportunity to ask the President of the General Assembly questions, my question to the PGA falls in the third category of questions, which is, what transformations are necessary in order to improve the implementation of the SDGs until 2027? And what do member states need to do to achieve this? My question, therefore, is, how can NGOs actively work with the UN regional offices to achieve the push for accelerated progress towards the SDGs? Can a working group be created for NGOs in consultative status with the United Nations, which will also serve as a regional platform to achieve this goal collectively, following a stakeholder consultation workshop? Thank you.
I thank Mr. Itikri for that excellent question, and now over to the PGA for replies.
Thank you very much, Melissa. With your permission, I would like to first react to the two interventions. There were no questions, but very important issues were brought up. And let me give some kind of reflection how I see and how my colleagues do see some of the real challenges, what we heard from the two presentations. First, on financing sustainable development, and in broader terms, what are the issues with the global financial infrastructure? We heard a very good analysis, detailed data, processes and suggestions, which deserve a very good attention, I think. Let me, in the line, agreeing what has been said, let me just mention my very humble, short approach to that. I think we have three types of problems facing with the today's international development financing. First, as it was said by Ms. Muchalla, it's unjust. It is not really helping those actors, communities, countries who are in the direst need. We have to change it. Otherwise, we are going to have a much, much bigger inequalities in the world and much deeper crisis in the years to come. The second, which is not a smaller problem, in my understanding, more than half of the development financing is still going along and towards very traditional objectives and projects. In layman terms, it is not supporting sustainable development transformation. At least half of the finances are going to projects that, if you wish, were part of creating the crisis, what we have today. And we still keep financing those projects and those types of projects instead of making a significant transformation. The third bunch of issues, bunch of challenges, in my understanding, that we do not take into account all the impacts of our investments. What does it mean in layman terms? When we finance a project, we tend to measure one type of outcome, one type of parameter, what we would like to see. But all our actions, all our policies and all our investments and projects have a multitude of impacts on the society, on the economy, on the natural capital, on the environment in broader terms. But if we only focus on one and neglecting the rest, we may believe that the rest would not exist. But the matter of fact, they do exist. And they do accumulate. And today we call them climate crisis, water crisis, loss of biodiversity, erosion of the soils, depletion of the seas, just to name a few. So we have to learn to measure and appreciate all the impacts and making an aggregated measurement of what we are creating, what kind of values we create and what kind of values we consume or eliminate. Concerning the financing summit, I think we have a very, very good chance. And in September, during the financial summit, we may have even a result that we are going to have a full-fledged UN financing development conference in 2025. All those big questions, what we are discussing today, are under consideration now in the General Assembly, hopefully under decision by September, and getting then we shall be getting prepared for the financing conference. Reflecting to Mr. Jean-Baptiste on the agroecology and the LDC's perspective, and thank you much for bringing it up. The one part of the challenges we are facing is whether or not we have enough nutrition food today to feed the 8 billion. There are good news and bad news. The good news that the answer is yes. The bad news that the distribution of this food is unequal. So the number of people in the world with major nutrition challenges, it means struggling to survive and sometimes getting into mortal danger, has grown by 200 million in the last 3 years. Now we are at the level of 350 million people in the world who are stunting or at the verge of famine. But the good news that if we take into consideration the today's technologies only, today's methodologies only, and it has been reconfirmed by the scientists during the last scientific briefing, what we had some 10 days ago in the General Assembly, we have the technologies today to feed 10 billion in a sustainable manner. It means by 2050, we shall need at least 30% more food, maybe 50% more food than what we have today. For that, with the today's methodologies, what we use, we are not going to have enough water, we may not have enough soil, and certainly the distribution system and financing system will not be adequate and sufficient. But once again, the good news that it is possible to feed 10 billion in a sustainable manner. Let us just listen to the scientists, use the technologies, and let's turn our eyes to the revision of sustainable food system strategies, which will be discussed in July in Rome. I have very high hopes, but in order to achieve that, we need a real transformation in the agriculture, in the agribusiness, and in market regulations. Responding to Ms. Bianco from Argentina, COVID crisis and some of the lessons learned. Let me take first the big picture. The COVID crisis introduced the prototype of the Anthropocene era crisis. It has never happened to us, to humanity, before. it is not just a pandemic. The pandemic ignited an avalanche, and within 2-3 months, 5-6 big areas of most of our societies were pushed to the verge of collapse. These were the public health, international trade, industrial production, public finances, food supplies, medical supplies, international trade, and consequently trust. As a consequence of this very complex crisis, now we have the unprecedented level of sovereign debts in the world because governments tried to keep the economies floating. So if we learn the lessons good enough, well enough, we may avoid the next Anthropocene era type crisis. If we don't learn the lessons well, then we are going to get this crisis again. It may come from a different corner, not necessarily from a virus. It might come from other sources. But the mechanism of sweeping through our subsystems and societies might be very similar. On the very concrete question Ms. Bianco has raised, I fully agree that we have a major issue with our advertisement industry. What is in the core of the problem? When we look at our kids in kindergarten, schools, they more or less learn how to appreciate hard work, how to appreciate the nature, how to appreciate the clean environment, and how to appreciate an equitable system of distributing wealth, and how to be modest, how to be content. Something happens at the age between 10 and 12 when they really start watching TVs and advertisement. They completely change their set of priorities and values. And it is a result of our advertisement industry. When they start appreciating, let's buy more of the same product, let's show off even better than our friends, let's be cool if we have the next trendy item which is being advertised. So within 2-3 years, when exposed to, in a larger extent, to the advertising industries, they completely change their daily and usual behavior. I think that should be changed. Because we cannot preach enough how important it is to switch to a transformation in terms of sustainability, to catering to our needs, but not necessarily our greeds. If we cannot make this transformation, so if we cannot change the impact of the advertisement industry on our children, then how can we expect that when they grow up and become wage-earning adults, they will behave in a different manner? That requires certainly a regulation, strong regulation on the advertisement industry, and requires a very strong oversight from you. Because governments need pressure. Governments need oversight on this issue as well. And last but not least, to Mr. Ogatogene. My apologies if the pronunciation of his name is not correct. When we crafted the SDGs, we created a platform. We call them, what is the major groups, which along 9 groups organized the activities of the NGOs, how to channel in the information and their requests, their suggestions to the work of the United Nations. These major groups still exist, but almost dormant. We have to make good use of it. I think some representatives of the major group might be in the room as well, so he or she might speak up on that. But it is at the level of the United Nations in New York. What we may need actually is on the ground, and on the ground, I think the best is if NGOs organize themselves in order to interact with governments or the local UN agencies. It would be a little bit awkward for the UN resident coordinator to tell NGOs who is the good one, who is not the good one, who should be in, who should be out. The local resident coordinators will be better off if an organized type of approach from NGOs would come to them and telling that here we are, we represent this and this parts of the society or activities, and we want you to listen to us. In many countries, it does work. It does work well. And my suggestion would be to listen to those experiences. It works well in India, it works well in some African countries, it works well in quite a few European countries and quite a few Latin American countries. So please take the initiative into your hands, organize yourself, and you cannot be resisted in that case. Thank you very much.
I thank the PGA for those thoughtful replies, and indeed, we do have representatives of major groups and other stakeholders, coordination mechanism here in this room. And the first question I'm going to give to a representative of major groups and other stakeholders. But let me just, a couple of housekeeping, because we're opening the floor to those in the room. We're going to, again, take 2 questions at a time, and please raise your hand so I can see you. And once you are called upon, if you can remember to state your name and your affiliation before asking your question. And please, as I said before, avoid making statements. We want to make sure that we get also to as many people as possible. And the light, just to take the floor, press the button next to your microphone. It will first be green. It's kind of counterintuitive. And when you're actually online and you speak, it's going to turn red when it's active. So who is our representative from major groups and other stakeholders? There you are, yes.
We can take a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Excellencies, Mr. President Kőrösi, distinguished delegates, my name is Mohammed Lutfi. I am representing the major groups and other stakeholders coordination mechanism, but I also represent a stakeholder group of persons with disabilities. We represent 1 billion plus people around the world. I am honored to contribute this important debate, The world is facing a conversion of interconnected global crises that are taking a devastating toll on people and the planet, and turning opportunities of sustainable development into illusion for the majority of people, particularly marginalized groups. At the 2030 World Economic Forum, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres rightly stated that it would be difficult to find solutions to these global interlinked problems in the best of times and in a world that would be united. But these are far from being the best of times, and the world is far from being united. Instead, we face the gravest levels of geopolitical division and mistrust in generations. In this context, the SDG Summit must provide both inspiration and concrete solutions. That is why we welcome the co-facilitators' commitment to ensuring that the political declaration will be ambitious, action-oriented, transformative, and implementable. For that, we need the political declaration to reflect bold political and financial commitments. One, first of all, national governments urgently need to step up their commitments to deliver on the 2030 agenda if they are to make tangible headways. And commitment must start with effective participation of all of civil society representatives, particularly or including marginalized groups, particularly persons with disabilities. In national development policies, which is not the case in many UN member states that are negotiating the political declaration. Thus, we urge you to include clear commitments with the recognition of common but differentiated responsibilities in terms of centering and guaranteeing human rights and freedom, protection of civil liberties, trade union leaders, human rights defenders, and promoting social dialogue. It is important to note that the processes of consultation so far have not been accessible to and inclusive for persons with disabilities, especially those that rely on sign language, captioning, braille, easy to read, and other accommodations. Secondly, we need the political declaration to contain explicit commitments on stepping up financing for the SDGs. Sufficient funding for the SDGs should be ensured through an increase in official development assistance, ODA, to 0.7% commitments. B, a transparent and multilateral debt relief architecture with debt restructuring and cancellation. C, multilateral reform of the current tax architecture to tackle tax evasion, tax avoidance, and illicit financial flows, as well as removing subsidies for activities that are harmful to the environment and human rights. D, an increased ambition for the relocation of special drawing rights to support an SDG-led recovery and resilience in developing countries. The alignment of all investments with SDGs so that business and private investment complies with ILO standards, responsibility business conduct, and mandated due diligence for human and labor rights. Thirdly, we need the political declaration to speak to peace and democracy. The world is facing the highest number of violent conflicts since Second World War, and 2 billion people live in places affected by conflict. The SDG Summit must contribute to the foundations for a world where peace, democracy, and social justice are paramount, centered on the principles of the United Nations. Fourth, it is essential that the political declaration steps up ambition to address our interlinked environmental challenges. Climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss will exacerbate inequalities without concerted effort to eliminate these risks. Further, without concrete action to transform our relationship with animals and nature, we face the ongoing risk of future zoonotic disease outbreaks and the economic and social consequences of these, as well as their impact on the achievement of the SDGs. The SDG Summit has the obligation to advance solutions to environmental challenges, as well as economic and social progress cannot be achieved if our foundation is severely degraded environment. The centrality of the United Nations will certainly need to be reinforced to deliver on these commitments, and truly inclusive multilateral frameworks with stronger accountability. Recommendations to advance the summit, the SDGs development, the Sustainable Development Goals. Oh, sorry, I missed one.
You're at the end.
Oh, I'm there. Okay. Okay, I think that's it.
It's not the right page.
No. Sorry,
Well, that's absolutely fine. I mean, we would also very much appreciate your statement in writing.
yeah.
But please,
I'm
if you
almost-
could ask you to wrap up.
Yeah,
thanks.
I'm wrapping up now. Mechanisms will be key for an future agenda on the sustainability of development. We need a new model of global governance to redress the current imbalance of power and uneven distribution of wealth at an international level. A truly inclusive multilateral system where social partners and civil society are on board and have a say will make the difference and pave the way to global resilience. The world needs a new vision to re-guarantee economic and societal models to build truly sustainable economies and societies. We therefore urge all governments to come forward with a political declaration that reflects the ambition and resources to achieve the SDGs by 2030. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and also on behalf of all the people that you represent. That was an extremely important statement. I would like to ask, though, going forward, if we could ask only questions. If you do have anything to submit, you can do that in writing. But we really only have about 20 minutes left, so also in courtesy of others who want to ask the PGA and the permanent representatives here who are also taking note of your questions, and we'll have time to also reply. I'd like to ask, you have a red armband. When it's
Thank
red,
you.
it's
Perfect.
live.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Your Excellencies and colleagues, for being here. My name is Luisa Veado. I work for Outright International, a global LGBTIQ organization, and I'm also one of the organizing partners of the LGBTI stakeholder group, which is lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and intersex stakeholder group, part of the coordination mechanism of the major groups and other stakeholders. I'd like to align ourselves with the statement that my colleague Mohammed just did, but I also would like to start, before asking my question, making an invitation to the President of the General Assembly to meet with the major groups and all the stakeholders in the same way that we do with the President of ECOSOC. We do meet with her right now every month, and I think it would be great if it's an open invitation for you and your office to meet with us and see the work that we're doing not only in New York, but in the regional mechanisms and how our constituents are doing the work to implementing the Agenda 2030 around the globe. So this is first an open invitation. And second, I could not take the floor and not talk about the LGBTI populations around the globe and how we were not included in the creation of the SDGs and how important it is that we talk about this, especially when we're disproportionately affected when it comes to the right to housing, when it comes to access to food, when it comes to humanitarian and development situations. And we specifically saw that on COVID-19, and Your Excellency mentioned that when talking about COVID-19 responses, on how much we need to learn from that, how LGBTI populations were left behind, and NGOs like my own had to do the financing and the work on including them in COVID-19 responses. So my question would be, how can we include LGBTI populations in the moving forward of the Agenda 2030, but in all multilateral spaces, not only as those who are disproportionately affected by human rights violations and excluded from development spaces, but also using our expertise, because we're the ones doing the work on the ground, we know what the issues are, and how do we include ourselves in these spaces, and how do we get invited to participate like all the other groups that were mentioned in Agenda 2030, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your question and invitation. Yes, I would like to ask the gentleman in the back, right, who has his hand still up, yes.
Tivana speaking on behalf of Civil Society Alliance Civicus, and thank you, Mr. President, for the opportunity to have this conversation today. And you raised a very important issue about civil society oversight over Agenda 2030. As part of a global civil society alliance, we find that our members and partners around the world, civil society activists who seek transformative change, and civil society organizations that uncover gross human rights violations are oftentimes facing huge amounts of persecution around the world. Many of them are subjected to restrictions on civic freedoms, including access to international funding. So how can we support these organizations? How can the UN, how can the UN Secretary General's call to action on human rights and the UN-wide guidance on civic space be incorporated into the political declaration as well as the UN's work across the board? Thank you very much.
Thank you for that very important question. We'll take one more, have a round of answers from the PGA, and hopefully we can get to a couple more questions after that. I'd like to ask the gentleman back there. Yes, you, yes.
Good morning, everyone. I want to speak in French because I represent a French country, Senegal. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs.
Good afternoon. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor and a privilege for me to be here today. I represent Civil Society of the North African Leaders Initiative, and it's a pleasure to be here today. I had a few important questions for the design and implementation of the projects that we deal with and that allow us to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, and I will list those in English.
How we can ensure that progress towards SDGs is equitable and inclusive, and that no one is left behind in the pursuit of sustainable development? My first question. And the second question is how we can better involve and empower local communities, civil society, and other stakeholders in the design and implementation of SDGs. My last question is, what are the most effective policies, program, and initiative that can help accelerate progress towards the SDGs, and how can they be scaled up and replicated if they works? Thank you.
Thank you for those very good questions. I'm going to ask the PGA to address those four questions that, well, one was a very meaningful statement, and the three questions that were asked.
Thank you much indeed. Concerning the negotiating process and the very precise content of the political declaration, member states, together with you, are supposed to produce by the September SDG summit. This part of the question I would like to leave to my good colleagues and friends who are leading this process, who have the full responsibility and capacity to guide the negotiations. I'd like to react, nevertheless, on one part of the intervention, just to unpack for ourselves, for our own consumption, what kind of crisis are we facing now today? Because it has not been really discussed, at least today. We have a very complex type of crisis, that's clear, but complex in terms also that on one hand, we are witnessing a deepening geopolitical divide in the world. A sign of that, or an implementation of that, is the war in Ukraine, but actually we are having 27 wars in the world going on. And if we look at the trends, how those wars and conflicts are being handled and managed by the participants, we can very easily see that the duration of these wars is becoming longer. The consequences in terms of destruction, in terms of loss of lives, is deeper. And in terms of involvement, foreign actors into those armed conflicts is becoming more visible. So on one hand, we have this trend. We are marching into a deeper and deeper geopolitical divide in the world. The other type of a bunch of crises related to our non-sustainable way of development. When we used to talk about separately the water crisis, climate crisis, biodiversity crisis, food crisis, health crisis, and many others, now the feature of the Anthropocene era, and particularly today after the COVID, these two major components of a mixture came together. And what we are facing today is a new type of complex of crisis and a very, very dangerous situation. We have never faced it before in the course of the human history. The SDG negotiations and the SDG summit will focus for 90% on the non-sustainable way of development related crises. Of course, dealing with many issues of human rights, democratic institutions, but I'm afraid it will be not the best forum to address the geopolitical divide in the world. That is still missing, and we have to find the most proper forum to discuss it. My response to the invitation to meet the major groups, yes, invite me and I'll be there. Let's discuss the time, let's discuss the topics, and let's discuss the participants. I would be more than happy to join you. to your second part of your question, if your representation, the LGBT community's representation, has an ECOSOC accreditation, you have the same rights and same opportunities and possibilities to participate at all UN meetings where civil society organizations are invited. You might be aware that some of the communities you are representing might be addressed in different ways by different countries, but once you have the ECOSOC accreditation, you have the possibility. On the Global Civil Society Alliance, the United Nations has a very robust and well-developed system of supporting human rights implementation and watching and addressing human rights violation. It's really a very, very robust system. We don't have time to go into details, but if you are interested, my colleagues in the OPGA would be happy to meet you and give you a very detailed description of how does it work, where are the proper forum, where are the exact addresses you may turn to, and who are the key actors in that system. Just, I would like to offer to your kind attention Eva Schaefer, just in the very modestly sitting in the second line. She is our main human rights expert in the OPGA. She can give you a good guidance how the system works and how to use it for the benefit of all of us. And last but not least, what is the main challenge? How to make sure that effective and the real acceleration of the implementation of the SDGs may take place in September. First and foremost, we need successful negotiations, what the two ambassadors here are leading. But if you would like me to give you my own take, first and foremost, we have to be very honest to ourselves. Asking very difficult questions and giving very honest answers to those questions. First and foremost, we have to ask ourselves what has been done well, what is going well, and how are we going to improve them. The second, more difficult question, where we are failing and why. And that is a very difficult question because it may require a change of voluntary national reporting. It may require the approach of most of the governments who are participating in this process. The third, we have to ask the question to ourselves, what is missing from the system of implementation? Maybe there are very important parts that are required for a more successful and accelerated implementation is missing. In my understanding, the whole methodology of measuring sustainability transformation is still missing. That's why you saw one of the points in your polls going beyond GDP, which I described as a new economics of sustainability. We don't have it. We are developing it as we speak. It may not be ready fully by September 2023, but I hope it will be ready by September 2024. If that would be ready, discussed and embraced by member states and hopefully by your communities, it will be a very different ballgame. And last but not least, a very broad question should be added, what else should be done? Have we inserted all the necessary steps into our reform concept of how to implement SDGs, maybe something is still missing. So it is a time you can tell us what you see, what is still missing in terms of concepts. Because it is still time to incorporate that concept into the political declarations. But for the declaration and the negotiation process itself, I would like to leave the answer to my good colleagues and friends.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We will be able to take another round of questions, but again, be brief with your questions so we can get to them all. And I'm going to start with you over there. Yes.
Thank you so much. Excellencies, dear colleagues, my name is Maggie Williams, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Global SDG 16 Plus Coalition, a collaborative and global coalition made up of SDG 16 Plus initiatives, member states, civil society, multilaterals, businesses, and others, all of whom are driven by a collective ambition to make progress on peace, justice, and inclusion. Thank you again very much for this opportunity. Our question is focused on the Secretary General's call for commitments, and so we'll also build upon a question made earlier. And the question is this. In approaching the political declaration and the SDG summit, could you please speak to current thinking about how commitments, either by member states or civil society and other stakeholders, might be formulated and supported, both in the lead up to the summit and also following from it? Are there any accountability mechanisms you might be considering for follow-up and implementation of commitments? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that question. And I'd like to now ask you right there. Yes. Yes, yes.
Mr. President, co-facilitators, respected delegates. My name is David Brannigan, and I'm asking this question on behalf of Treatment Action Group, an independent, activist, and community-based research and policy think tank committed to ending the HIV, tuberculosis, and hepatitis C virus pandemics. The fight to end tuberculosis, like many other aspects of the Sustainable Development Goals, has lost progress due to the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2020 and 2021, TB incidence and deaths increased for the first time since 2005, and the world has fallen far short of meeting nearly all of the prevention and treatment targets set at the 2018 United Nations High-Level Meeting on TB. All of the SDGs are mutually dependent, and by solving specific challenges related to TB, member states will be generating cross-cutting benefits. In September, on the sidelines of the 2023 SDG Summit, UN member states will convene in New York for the second high-level meeting on TB. At these meetings and in the resulting political declarations, member states should recognize that advancing science against diseases such as TB, in order to realize the SDGs, falls under duties all states hold to fulfill the right of everyone to enjoy the benefits of scientific progress and its applications, the right to science. States must invest in science and act to make the benefits of science equitably available to all, without discrimination. The question Treatment Action Group raises for discussion is, what steps will the General Assembly take to ensure the inclusion of right to science provisions in the SDG political declaration that, one, increase investment in TB research and development, especially for TB vaccines, two, promote the rapid uptake and implementation of the best available technologies in the fight against TB as a human right, and three, remove legal intellectual property and other pricing barriers that prevent equitable access to these technologies. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. I'm going to ask you in the red. Yes, please.
Hello. Okay. Thank you. I'm Roby Halip with the Indigenous Peoples Major Group. Before I go to my questions, just quickly on the political declaration, while recent developments severely impacted the SDG progress, we also need to look at the systemic issues that's been causing inequality, and that's never been mentioned in the political declaration. Also, the mention on strengthening accountability in the implementation of the SDGs is very, very much needed. Now, on my question, the first one is what steps or measures are being undertaken to ensure that there's an integrated review or assessment of the implementation and progress of the SDGs to make sure that the progress of one will not result to the regress of another, which is currently happening now. And this is connected to my second question on the voluntary national review. How do we strengthen the voluntary national review and local reviews of the SDG implementation to make sure that it's not just a cherry-picking exercise of goal reporting of states, but to really ensure how everybody is involved and included in the implementation of the SDGs. And lastly, are there plans to conduct dedicated consultations with indigenous peoples? The Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues is currently happening now, and it's not often that we are here in New York to be able to meet up with the UN, and I think this is an opportunity to also meet with indigenous peoples who are currently here attending the UN session. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that statement. And oh, how I wish we had more time. I mean, this is very difficult for us, and very sorry that we're not going to be able to get to all of you. I think we can take 2 more questions, and I'm going to go to you here. And question, please.
Thank you so much. I am from West Papua indigenous people. I came far away to here, and I'm glad to see Mr. President. I want to tell 2 questions only. The first is, can you revoke the UN General Assembly Resolution 2504 that set up the referendum in 1969, because the referendum is illegal, fought by the settler 600 Indonesian and 400 indigenous Papuan, and 800,000 people not fought in the referendum. That's why today we fight in the conflict, and our indigenous people, the defender, we call West Papua National Liberation Army, fight against with Indonesian security force, and we never stop. And our parents fight against the Indonesian before, because we have independence. We have, according to the United Nations Charter, Article 73, and then Netherlands and United Nations has set up the resolution.
Question.
Yeah. So, and this my question is, can you revoke the UN General Assembly Resolution 2504 that established the referendum? And then the first and the second is, can you set up the resolution 170504, or I give you the statement you can see, to set up back in the general in the trusteeship council, to set up back our territory back to the list of non-self-governing territory. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your question, and I'm going to give the final question to those who've been disadvantaged in the back, way back there, so that we see you. Yes, sir.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, distinguished guests, I'm Jose Pizarro from the Republic of Chad. I'm speaking on behalf of the Action Citizen Information for Sustainable Development. We are midway through the SDGs report, and we're looking for positive indicators in Western countries. We may see some there, but that's not the case for developing countries, and more specifically in Africa and in the Sahel, which is going through an unprecedented security crisis, be it in Chad, in the Congo, in Sudan most recently, to mention but a few. The question I'd like to put to the President is, despite the fact that we're in 2023, people are living on less than $1 a day, despite the fact that we produce enormous resources, how is it that the United Nations, through its agencies working in our respective countries, can work with local civil society, more specifically with organizations which have consultative status, to ensure that the SDGs become a reality in our countries? Thank you.
Thank you Thank you for that good question and perspective. And I just learned this morning that Chad is welcoming refugees from Sudan. So thank you to your country and your people for supporting them. I'd like to now turn to the PGA and ask him to respond to this round of questions before we go to our final round, which is to hear from the two ambassadors who are with us today.
Thank you much, and many, many thanks for your thoughtful questions and guidances. Again, those questions and remarks related to the negotiating process leading us to the SDG summit, I would leave to my good colleagues and friends. On tuberculosis, you might be aware that currently, there are 16 negotiating processes going on in the General Assembly. It has never been so in the past. It's too much, in my understanding. But one of them is taking the lessons learned from the tuberculosis, the pandemic of tuberculosis, and to take the necessary decisions how to stop this very dangerous spreading disease, which could be actually controlled very well by the today's devices of medicine. This process, this negotiating process, is led by Poland and Uzbekistan. And if you have any specific questions, any specific suggestion to be included into the negotiating process, please approach these two ambassadors, Poland and Uzbekistan. On the high-level week in September, we're going to have a tuberculosis-related high-level event. It will be in the second half of the high-level week. So it's still time. It is a good moment for all your suggestions to be included into the process. In a broader terms, science, what you have mentioned, how science can help the decision shaping and decision taking, and I would add validation of implementation in the UN and particularly in the General Assembly. I think it is the most important question of the day, because when we are in a complex crisis, we have to make sure that our answers, our solutions must be also integrated, must be also taking into account many, many angles and many dimensions. To do so, we can only build on scientific evidence. We are not going to ask the scientists to tell us what should be the decisions in certain governments or in the United Nations. So we are not going to task them to be the decision makers, but we are asking them to contribute to the decision shaping in a form that they could help us identifying in very complex situations what are the options ahead of us and what might be the consequences of taking those options, or if we opt for non-actions. That partly exists in the UN agency system. In some agencies, you have scientific advisory boards. The Secretary General is just about to re-establish his scientific advisory board, and as we discussed with him, that scientific advisory board will be very helpful for the General Assembly as well. For each and every of the 16 negotiating processes, I've asked the co-chairs and co-facilitators to start the processes with taking on board scientific evidence, inviting experts from various fields of economy, science, civil society, youth, and many other fields of engagement to make sure that we create a common knowledge base. Standing on that common knowledge base, member states might be in a better position, despite their ideological, political, or geopolitical differences. They might be in a better position to identify where is the point of departure. And now it is happening as we speak. The scientific briefing, what we had about a week ago, was explaining to the member states what might be our possibilities, how to improve the scientific support system in the United Nations. And let me add what I referred to at the beginning of this intervention at this time. We need a much better scientific input to validate the implementation of our decisions. And it particularly applies to the SDG implementation. Because as it was mentioned, and I'm including now the other question coming from the indigenous communities, the voluntary national reports are not really standardized, not in terms of data validation, and certainly not in terms of validation of the implementation. So when we read the voluntary national reports, we may have an impression that all in all, things are going very well in the world. These reports are, one of them is better than the other. So we have a kind of feeling that basically we are going to the right direction. If we look at the global data, we have a very different impression. And the difference between the two is the quality of data, the quality of validation of data, and the set of data we include into the voluntary national reports. In my understanding, it is, on one hand, a scientific support that should be reinforced within the United Nations. On the other hand, it is the voluntary national reports that what we need to change. We need to change not in order to be part of a beauty contest, but to be part of the transformation. A very difficult question, whether the United Nations can reverse a national referendum, a result of the national referendum. My answer could be very easy and very short. But first, let me take from a legal point of view. If you are asking for a GA resolution on any matter, the way is that member states should come up with a notion. Member states should come up with an initiative and then a draft text. It should go to one of the committees, of the 6 main committees of the General Assembly. It should be discussed and approved, the text negotiated in the given committee, and then to be approved by the General Assembly. So if there would be an initiative by a country or group of countries to revisit any earlier decision, this is the way. However, I don't think it will be the prime responsibility of the General Assembly to undo the result of a national referendum in a member state. Last but not least, to our colleague from Chad. how to engage with the UN agencies in order to improve and accelerate the SDG implementation in the given countries. First, let me mention you the good news. The UN agencies are now tasked, and it is their task number one in each and every country to promote and to help and to assist the implementation of the Agenda 2030. So if you want to be a partner in that implementation, I think they will be very happy to work with you. Just make sure that you organize yourself, approach the resident coordinator in the given country, in the case of Chad now, consult with them, and bring your suggestions to their attention. Last but not least, still let us not forget the implementation of the SDGs in each and every country is the prime responsibility of the government. All other actors, including the UN agencies, are assisting and helping. So you have to make sure that in each and every country, rich and poor, that the governments and the elected politicians feel it as their responsibility to implement what we have agreed upon here in the United Nations in terms of Agenda 2030, Paris Agreement, Biodiversity Agreement, agreements on ocean, and the rest is the support system. Thank you very much.
I thank the PGA, and I thank you also for these amazing questions. I'm sure we would have had 20 more if we had had the time. I also would like to thank the interpreters for agreeing to stay on for a bit longer, and thank you, PGA, for also staying on, and our co-facilitators of the 2023 SDG Summit. To my right, His Excellency Mr. Fergal Maithen, who is the permanent representative of Ireland to the United Nations, and Her Excellency Ms. Alia Ahmed Saif Al Thani, who is the permanent representative of the state of Qatar to the United Nations. And they're going to be sharing reflections on today's comments and questions that you have posed, but also to speak about the road leading to the 2023 SDG Summit, a short road. Mr. Maithen, the floor is yours to begin.
Thank you very much, Melissa. And is that working?
Yes.
Yep, very good. And thank you for chairing this event so ably. And thank you, President of the General Assembly, Csaba Kőrösi. We made a decision last year as members of the UN General Assembly to appoint Csaba as President, and it was the absolutely right decision, as you've seen here today. He is an absolute champion of the Sustainable Development Goals, a champion of science and data and facts, and a champion of civil society, and it's a real honour to be part of your team as we try to reinvigorate and recharge the Sustainable Development Goals. It's very, very important for my country. Ireland was involved very proactively in 2014, 2015, in that magical moment when we agreed the Sustainable Development Goals. And part of that magic was the role of yourselves in that process, an integral part, not decision makers, but decision shapers. And it was hugely important then, and it's hugely important now as we face the challenges of galvanising political support for realising the dream and the visions and the hope of 2015. 2015 seems like a while ago. So much has changed. Maybe we would struggle to get agreement on the SDGs now in the current climate, but we did achieve that agreement in 2015, and that's what we now want to do in terms of September, is to bring our leaders together in this building to renew our vows to that vision and to renew our vows to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which are integrated. It's still a vision worth striving for, and it's despite all the challenges. I think the President put it very, very clearly. We have to look at what's going well. So it's not all gloom and doom, but we have to look at what's going well, where we're making progress. We have to look, frankly, honestly, at where we're failing. drawing on science, drawing on data, drawing on your experience at local level as well as national level. And then we have to see, what else, what's missing, what's changed since 2015 that we need to address. And none of those are easy. But really we want to look at September as a galvanizing moment when we look, we rise above the challenges of recent years, the firefighting on COVID, conflict, etc., and we really look to how we can drive forward to 2030. We're not doing this on our own. We're not doing this just working on our assumptions. We're drawing on science and data. We have the Global Sustainable Development Report. It's already out. It's very challenging, but it's not without hope. Likewise, we await the publication of the UN Secretary General's Progress Report next week, a very, very important document for us. So we'll draw on these, and we'll draw on your own experiences, and as Melissa said, we really want to receive copies of your statements. Those who did speak, those who didn't get a chance to speak today, do submit your statements, your analyses, your viewpoints, your questions to us. It's really, really important to us now as we go forward. So we need to understand the challenges, we need to understand your perspectives as decision shapers, and then drawing on all of that information, we will hope to chart a course towards accelerating implementation. I think it was one of our speakers here earlier spoke about the need for what we decide on in September to be implementable. It's a very, very important word. We are diplomats, we can craft fine words and fine declarations, but it's the actions, it's the verbs, it's the implementables that are really, really important, that changing that vision into action. That's what we want to do. So what we want from September is a very, very clear statement of direction. We want to set out where we are now in realistic terms, in frank terms, in honest terms, and we want to draw on actions that will really make a difference as we drive towards 2030, as we get the SDGs back on track. Thirdly, we want a very strong political declaration from our heads of state and government, our leaderships at political level. And I wasn't surprised to see political commitment being the #1 issue. That's certainly what myself and my colleague Ambassador Al-Thani feel. September is first and foremost a political recommitment to the goals, and that's what we're seeking. In terms of our work currently, we have, myself and Ambassador Al-Thani, we have brought together the member states of the United Nations. We've heard initial reflections, comments. We've brought together, we've circulated an elements paper. We did that in early February. We've had further consultations, including with consultations with civil society. And once we have the Secretary General's report out next week, we hope to issue what's called a zero draft. You know the UN language better than I do. A zero draft in the coming weeks. And we want to then really engage with member states and with yourselves on the content of that zero draft, and working through May, June, July, if need be, to really craft a strong political declaration for the summit. That's our timescale. In a sense, the last few months we've just been in the foothills. Now once we lay down the zero draft, we're making the ascent to the summit, and that's where it gets difficult and challenging, but that's where the real action happens. And we really want to keep engaging with yourselves, hearing from you as we go through that process. It's very, very important. I think for us, the success of the summit in September is about the SDGs, but it's also about showing that multilateralism can work, that our system of world cooperation and governance can work. It's going through a difficult patch. I think one of the speakers spoke about, the challenges facing the UN, the challenges facing our UN system, and multilateralism is akin to maybe many decades ago. And it's a challenge around this building in terms of reaching consensus and agreement. We see that in many, many fora, in the Commission on the Status of Women, in the Budgetary Committee, in the Financing for Development Forum. It's getting more challenging to reach consensus, but we are getting there. We still know the tools, we still know the way of doing this. So we're not despondent. We are realistic, but we are hopeful. And I think that's what we want to inject, myself and Ambassador Al-Thani, working with the PGA over the next few weeks to inject a sense of urgency, realism, but also hope that we can come together in September as a world community. We can say, yes, the SDGs are still our goals. They're still relevant. They still define in 17 areas the global challenges and the global vision of a much, much better world for all our peoples, leaving no one behind in every part of the world. And that still remains our honest, valid vision for the world. And that's what we hope to do. And for us, these kind of engagements are hugely, hugely important. And I hope this isn't the last such engagement as we head towards September. And I know we'll see many of you here in September for that moment. So with that, that's the broad vision and the broad roadmap of where we want to get to. I'm going to hand over the floor to Ambassador Al-Thani.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much again, Mr. President, for creating today the opportunity for us to have this important town hall meeting with the civil society community. Again, I'm very privileged and proud to work under the leadership of President Csaba, who is his experience, his depth of knowledge in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development as one of the masterminds in putting that important document through. Through your guidance, I'm sure we will be able to navigate in this very important milestone moment as we, in the lead up to the SDG Summit. I want to thank as well the civil society community today. Clearly, I can see your genuine interest, your depth of knowledge and contribution that will help guide us in the way forward and accelerating the progress towards the full implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So I really thank you for every single recommendation. Every point you have flagged today has been noted and will be taken on board. I wanted also, building on what my colleague, my fellow co-facilitator have mentioned today, and he've covered very well the way forward, the process, what comes next in terms of the consultations, what we will do in the next few months. Again, we count on your support, your engagement throughout. Let me just reflect some points that I've heard from you today, and I think, again, it's so important for us to keep in mind throughout this process. One, you've mentioned, of course, again and again, how important that the political declaration should reaffirm the role played by the civil society community in the implementation of the SDGs. This is very evident today. Member states cannot do the work without you. You do the grassroots work on the ground. So this participatory approach should continue. Without it, we cannot address crisis, situations, conflict settings. Nothing can be done without you. You flagged we've heard the young voice today in the meeting through some of the key video messages. The importance of a greater role for the youth in all decision makings throughout the process of achieving the SDGs. Very important. Again, youth today are playing important roles as mediators at the grassroots level, at the community level. Again, we cannot do things without achieve the SDGs without the greater role of the youth. So that will be definitely flagged. Again, the political declaration should hold governments, international organizations, multinational corporations, and other powerful actors, including the private sector, accountable for both their progress, the achievements they have done, and setbacks in working together toward the full implementation of the 2030 Agenda. In the beginning of the meeting, the PGA had a very good poll, and you've answered immediately, and you've clearly indicated that the key change needed to put the SDGs on track is the political will, the political commitments. So the political declaration should demonstrate a clear commitment to, again, protecting human rights, leaving no one behind, and we cannot do that without generating the political will to secure all necessary needs, including the resources to reach the SDGs by 2030. You've also talked about transformations needed, and again, these transformations needed will not be possible nor effective without addressing inequalities. Again, this was the second question in the poll we had today. You immediately indicated the number one aspect when it comes to addressing and putting the SDGs on track is addressing inequalities between countries and within countries, and as well reaching gender equality. So these are key aspects that we need to keep in mind. We cannot do that, again, unless through identifying rising inequalities, discrimination, poverty, climate change, biodiversity loss, addressing the impact of conflict. The PGA flagged that we are facing today more than 25 conflicts around the world. This is a key impediment and a key setback to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. You've talked about the current financial system and the challenges faced in that, the deep-rooted challenges faced in the current financial system. We've heard you clear and loud when you talked about the need to have an economic transformation to tackle debt, the debt crisis, address honestly and practically the issues relating to tax evasions, addressing the need of the most vulnerable countries and the most vulnerable groups. That's been clearly heard in today's meeting. Addressing the crisis related to food insecurity, again, the interlinkages between climate change, biodiversity, and pollution. Again, I think there is always an opportunity to look at these issues together, and you've really been very much clear on addressing that today. There is also very good points addressed today in the meeting relating to follow-up. What happens after the convening of the SDG summit? The need to have clear-cut review and assessment of where we are, especially that we are approaching our deadline, 2030. And there will be the summit, the SDG summit as well after 4 years in 2027. So again, I think it's very important to keep in mind that we are not working only towards the summit, but we need to focus on the future. And one of the key points addressed by the PGA today is looking at new economic tools. Beyond GDP as well is a very important concept. We might not have a good, component, reach a component soon in September, but I think on looking at these new concepts, but we have to keep it in mind that how we can see the concept of beyond GDP as the chief measure for countries' progress, including by emphasizing access to equitable financing and scientific and technological knowledge transfers. So this is one of the important areas that we see as the linkage as well between the SDG Summit and the Summit of the Future in 2024. So let's keep it in mind and see and hear your contributions towards these new economic tools that could be put in place to put the SDGs again back on track before our deadline in 2030. I've prolonged here, but I wanted to try my best to cover many of the very important points you have raised today. But again, I think the partnership we have between governments, civil society community, together with the United Nations and private sector is key to the implementation of the SDGs, and you are playing an important component in doing that. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Again.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador, and also for that great summary of everything that we heard today. And thank you, President Kőrösi, for convening this town hall, and especially to all of you for being here, for listening, for contributing, and for playing your part to accelerating The SDGs, I think, will take what the ambassador from Ireland said as a motto: urgency, realism, but also hope, as something to take away. Thank you for inspiring us. Thank you for being here, and wishing you a lot of success and in all of your efforts to make our world a better place and to implement the SDGs.